What's up, everybody? Oh, wow, this is going to be a challenge, but that's okay. I like it. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lauderdale. I live in Madison, just actually across the street from the Madison campus. I was a pastor for 11 years. Right now, I am the business manager and director of training for a contractor here in town. Let's see, what else? I'm married. Been married 31 years in December. Woohoo! I have two daughters, 25 and 19. Let's see, what else? Oh, yeah, I'm an Alabama fan. Roll Tide. Thank you, I needed that. It was so funny. I was telling somebody earlier, watching the game last night, the only good thing I can say about it was I could go to bed earlier than normal that I would have. But about 11:45, I was texting with a pastor friend of mine in Mobile. And I finally said, "Hey, dude, are you preaching tomorrow?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Me too, so maybe we need to go to bed." I don't know how late Brett stayed up, but I tapped out at that point. I couldn't go any further. It's good to be here. I always enjoy getting when I get to come and teach here. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a conversation or watching a movie or whatever, and you heard a phrase, and you thought, I wonder where that came from? Or how did that get started? I'm kind of weird, so I think of stuff like that, like this one, the whole 9 yards. Well, the way it started was in World War II, fighter planes had the ammunition for the machine guns issued to them on these belts. You've seen them in movies and stuff before. Well, each mission, the pilot got issued 9 yards of ammunition. So if he were to use all of his ammunition on one target, they would say he went the whole 9 yards. Aren't you glad you came to church today? More than you can shake a stick at. When a shepherd or a farmer was taking his flock and trying to direct them around, he would have his staff, and when he wanted them to go a certain direction, he would shake it, right? Or shake it over this way or that way or whatever. Well, sometimes he would get so many sheep that the ones at the back of the flock couldn't see the stick. And at that moment, the farmer would be said to have more sheep than he could shake a stick at. It gets better, trust me. Rubbed the wrong way. In colonial America, the servants of the house every week would have to wipe down the wooden floors, and you would wet rub them and dry rub them. But if you went against the grain, they looked like junk. And if you did that, you would make the owner of the house very unhappy, and you would have said to have rubbed them the wrong way. You'll like this one, trust me. This is my favorite one. As hard as it is to believe, it used to not be that unusual for people to be buried alive. Weird, right? So the people who were really forward-thinking, when they bought their casket ahead of time, they bought this special model that had a rope that was attached to a bale that was above grade. So they would put the casket in, and then they put the bale above grade. At night, when the night watchmen were at the cemetery, they would listen. And if they heard a bell, they would go find out what bell was ringing, dig the person up, and thereby the person was saved by the bell. It's just weird, right? All right, now this one, does anybody here have that friend that when they come over, they can't take a hint of when you're ready for them to leave? You keep kind of, come on, and they just don't get it. Well, if you lived in medieval Europe, you didn't have that problem. Because what you would do, when you had a party then, it lasted all day, right? So at the end of the day, when the host was ready for you to go, he would collect up some of the leftover meat, cold shoulder, and hand it to you, and that was your cue that you had to go. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. And there's a very polite way to kind of do that. So next time you got somebody that won't leave, do a very southern thing, make them a plate of leftovers, give them whatever, and maybe they'll take the hint. This guy's name is Dr. Samuel Mudd. Dr. Mudd was the physician who treated John Wilkes Booth after Booth assassinated President Kennedy. If you remember the story from history, when he assassinated Lincoln, he hopped off of the balcony at the Ford Theater onto the stage and broke his leg. He got on a horse with another companion, and they rode to Dr. Mudd's house. The reason being was Booth had been meeting with Mudd several times before the assassination and was a pro-slavery sympathizer. Dr. Mudd cut his boot off, put a splint on it, Booth went on his way. Later on, when the authorities came back and were investigating it, in the beginning, Dr. Mudd denied doing it, but eventually came clean, even including bringing the boot that he'd cut off of Booth's leg and giving it to the authorities. Dr. Mudd was convicted of conspiracy to assassinate the president. In fact, on his conviction, he missed the death sentence by one vote. He was transferred to a prison in Key West, Florida, where he did several years, and then was later moved back to a prison in Maryland, closer to his home. President Andrew Johnson would come along eventually and pardon Mudd, but not vacate the conviction. Mudd's grandson spent his entire life, essentially, trying to clear the family name, trying to get anybody he could talk to vacate that conviction. But isn't it amazing, 150 years later, because of the choice one man made, we still use that phrase, his name is Mudd, to talk about someone whose reputation is tarnished, whose legacy is destroyed. Isn't it amazing how one choice can have eternal consequences? Isn't it amazing how just one wrong choice can affect not you, but thousands of other people that you don't even know about? So today I've been assigned the topic of choose as a part of the discipleship series that Michael and Suzanne are leading you through. And I was really excited when they asked me because I love the topic. Because in my mind, a church is a gathering of disciples. And so when we can kind of encourage one another, inspire one another, learn from each other about what it means to be a disciple, then I'm excited and I'm all in. So I was really glad when I got this topic, because in its essence, being a disciple of Jesus is a choice. Everybody gets to choose that. And I don't mean just get out of hell free card. When you're a disciple, you are deciding to orient your entire life around Jesus. When you make that choice, you're deciding that you're going to spend your money the way your rabbi spent his money. You're going to deal with other people the way that your rabbi dealt with other people. You're going to orient the words that you say while you're watching a football game around the right way. A lot of prayer last night. I'm just coming clean. A lot of forgiveness. I'm just saying. But here's the thing. Somewhere along the line, we decided that being a disciple meant being a student. And that's not at all true. In the first century, being a disciple, a Talmid, T-A-L-M-I-D, for those type A taking notes, meant that not only did you know what the rabbi knew, you could do what the rabbi did. I did a long teaching about that here, a little more than a year ago. And so if you'd like to learn about more of this in excruciating detail, go get that podcast and you can listen to it. But I'm going to give you the Cliff Notes version to frame our conversation today. In the first century, the ultimate goal for any good Jewish parents for their son only, was for him to be a rabbi. Because being a rabbi was the ultimate job. Rabbi was part rock star, part lawyer, part judge, part preacher, part stand-up comedian, if you can believe that. Rabbis are sarcastic. They were just everything. And so you wanted your son to end up that. Because of that, the Jewish educational system was arranged that way. There were 3 levels of it. And the best of the best made their way through all 3 levels until you got to the last level, which is called Bet Talmud, B-E-T-H-T-A-L-M-U-D, again for the type A's. And in that stage, a boy, 15 or so years old, would spend some time traveling, listening to different rabbis. And when he decided the one that he wanted to follow, he would come and literally sit at the rabbi's feet while the rabbi was teaching. And that was his way of saying, Rabbi, I want to be one of your Talmidim, plural of Talmid. I want to be your disciple. At that time, the rabbi would look at the boy and begin to examine him, trying to find out, was he the best of the best? Did he know what I knew, and could he do what I do? Most of them could not. All along the way, most all the boys were sent back to work in the family business. But every once in a while, the rabbi would run across a kid who had it. And when he did, he would look at that kid and say, Lek Akarai, which is Hebrew for follow me. Jesus comes along and takes that entire system and inverts it. Jesus comes along and he's not going after the best of the best. Jesus comes along and he's going for the not good enoughs. Jesus comes along and he's going for the guys who flunked out. Jesus is coming along and saying, I don't necessarily have to have the best of the best. I don't want the best of the best. I want committed ones. In that vein, let me read you a story from Mark chapter 1 that will kind of help frame the rest of our time. One day as Jesus was walking along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew throwing a net into water, for they fish for a living. And Jesus called out to them, Lek Akarai, come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. And they left their nets at once and followed him. See, here's what we know about this. They were not the best of the best because they were back working in the family business. But now this famous rebel rabbi comes up to them and says, I think you can do what I do. I think you can be me. Of course you would leave your nets. Of course you would walk away from everything because the rabbi picked you. The rabbi said, you can be my talmid, you can be my disciple. Gets a little better. A little further up the shore, shore is giving me problems today. Jesus saw Zebedee's sons, James and John, in a boat repairing their nets. He called them at once, and they also followed him, leaving their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men. Can you imagine what happened when Zebedee got home that night? When he walked in the house and his wife said, where are the boys? That he was able to say, the rabbi picked them. The rabbi called them. These guys in this story all had a choice. They didn't have to follow Jesus. They chose to. And think about the impact that choice has had. I mean, you could even say that we're all sitting here in some way because of the choice that they made. They made a choice, one choice, that has been impacting the world for 2,000 years. Well, today we're going to spend some time in Mark chapter 14. If you've got your Bible or your app, you can open up, or I'll have the words up on the screen. And we're going to look at a story of two people who made two very different choices when it comes to Jesus. And we're going to look at the impact it had on their lives and all of ours. And then we're going to hear about a guy, a modern guy who made a similar decision. So, Mark chapter 14, context is this. It's Passover time. This is important. Here's why it's important. Passover, everybody's got to show up in Jerusalem in the first century at least once. Most of the time people try to do it every year, which meant Jerusalem's population increased by hundreds of thousands. Some historians will tell you it increased by 1 million. Now, I've been in the old city in Jerusalem, and I can't imagine 1 million people in there. But they were there, which meant that the religious leaders who wanted to do away with Jesus couldn't because they were afraid of the people, that they would rebel. There was too many of them, and they would rebel because it was being done during Passover. So it's in that context that this interaction happens between Jesus and this lady. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume made from essence of nard. She broke open the jar and poured the perfume over his head. Some of those at the table were indignant. Why waste such expensive perfume, they asked. It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor, so they scolded her harshly. But Jesus replied, leave her alone. Why criticize her for doing such a good thing to me? You will always have the poor among you, and you can help them whenever you want to. Before I reveal the next verse, let me just tell you, this next verse that I'm going to show you, this is my life's goal. If I can have said of me at the end of my life, this next verse, I'm good. I can die penniless. And as long as verse 8 is said of me, it's all good. I'll be perfectly content. I'll be perfectly happy. If this could be put on my tombstone, life has been a success to me. She has done what she could and anointed my body for burial ahead. I tell you the truth. Wherever the good news is preached throughout the world, this woman's deed will be remembered and discussed. She made a choice. She chose one thing to do, and we're still talking about it. How about that for a goal of life? How about that being what we want to be remembered for? How about that legacy? And it was all because of one choice. Now, to be sure, it was a very, in the world's eyes, controversial choice. Remember it said about the value of the perfume, it said it was worth a year's wages? If that's true, and we have to assume that they did the right assessment of its value, what's she going to live on for the next year? How's she going to survive? What's next? She has demonstrated that she wants to be Jesus' disciple in the most public, valuable way that she could, without thinking about what's next. Totally counter to what the world would have said was the right way to do it. But there's another part of the story. Another guy makes one choice that has had eternal consequences. And it's just one verse. Verse 10. Then Judas Iscariot, one of the 12 disciples, went to the leading priest to arrange to betray Jesus to them. One choice. One choice to say no. A choice that would end up costing him his life because of all of the guilt, he ends up committing suicide. He chose the money. One of the other Gospels talks about what he was paid for. One lady chose against the money. Another guy chose the money. And so even today, 2,000 years later, if you want to say that somebody has betrayed you in the most severe way you can, what do you call them? A Judas. One choice. One choice. One lady chose a way that looked totally different from the world. My favorite story about this is a friend of mine. I do a podcast called The Modern Southern Gentleman Show. And in that show, I interview successful Southern guys just from all over the place. And one of those interviews that I did a few months ago was a guy named Lenny LeBlanc. Lenny lives in Florence now, and he grew up in South Florida in the early 60s. And like a lot of guys of that vintage, he got interested in music. Not only did he get interested in it, he discovered he was pretty good at it. He taught himself to play guitar and bass and piano. And along that time, he met another guy named Pete Carr. And they formed a group called LeBlanc and Carr. Wrote a lot of songs, cut a lot of records. In fact, they had several hits. And as a result of that, their record company put them on tour opening for another band from Florida that some people might have heard of, Leonard Skinner. So they're doing a gig in South Florida. The gig is over, and Skinner tells them, they got to be in Baton Rouge. I think it was a couple of days they had to get from South Florida to Baton Rouge. Skinner said, we got to go do a gig in North Carolina. We got 2 empty seats on the plane. So Pete and Lenny, you guys hop on if you want to. Just come hang out, and then we'll fly back to Baton Rouge and do the gig. Well, Pete and Lenny didn't feel right about doing that when their band was going to have to make that long drive from South Florida all the way across the Gulf to Baton Rouge. So they said, thanks, but we'll just meet you guys there. Cool, whatever. Pete and Lenny decide to make it a songwriting trip. So the whole drive, they're working on music, and they had the radio turned off. And this is in the early 70s. No cell phone, no nothing. They don't know what's going on in the world. They end up in Baton Rouge, and they get to their hotel, and they have this long list of messages waiting on them, telling them that Leonard Skinner's plane had crashed on the way to Baton Rouge, and 3 of the members had died. The plane that they had 2 empty seats they could have been on. The record company puts them out with 5 or 6 other different groups. They finish the tour, and at that point, Pete Carr says, this touring thing, this is not for me. So, Lenny, you go do you. I'm just going to write music. Lenny said, cool. Lenny moves back to Muscle Shoals and works doing session work at Muscle Shoals Sound and at Fame Studios, and continues to write music and has a really good career going. Then one night, he gets a phone call from a drug dealer friend of his. A drug dealer who had loaned him $10,000 to buy his way out of a record deal a few years before. So they were really, really good friends. And the drug dealer said, Lenny, man, I got to tell you something. My life has changed. And I want to tell you about it. Lenny told me, he said, D, man, I knew this dude was hardcore, and if something had happened to get him out of selling dope, I needed to know what that was. The guy shared his faith with Lenny. Lenny came to Christ. At that time, Lenny is still in the record business. He's still working, he's still touring, he's still writing, he's still doing it all. And he said at that time, and at this point, Lenny's story is about to intersect with our story today. At about this time, he began to sense God was calling him out of the record business, out of the music business, which made no sense. Lenny was married, he had a daughter to support, and God was saying, I need you out of that world. So after struggling for about 3 months with the decision, he said, all right, God, I don't understand this. Doesn't make any sense, but okay, if that's what you're calling me to do, I'll do it. So he walks into Fame Studios and the Muscle Shoals Sound Studios and his record company and said, I'm done. I'm out. And they were like, what do you mean you're out? And he said, I'm done. They said, Lenny, how are you gonna survive? How are you gonna make it? How are you gonna take care of your daughter? You're making tons of money right now. What are you gonna do? And he said, I honestly don't know. I just know God is calling me to make this choice. So he walked away, and fortunately, Lenny is also a carpenter. He grew up with his dad and his brother learning carpentry skills. So he just did handyman work. He'd build a deck for somebody, or he'd replace a door for somebody, or he'd get really lucky and get to work on a framing crew to build a house, and that'd be several days, several weeks' work. Then he started leading worship in a little small church in Florence. A really, really, really small church, a really, really, really poor church. And he said it was so bad that the pastor would get paid $100 for the week, and sometimes he'd give Lenny 50 of it, just because he knew he was struggling so much. And along the way, Lenny is still writing music. Now remember, this is before contemporary Christian music gets popular. There's no contemporary Christian radio. There's no record companies to speak of at this time. There's just nothing. And I asked Lenny, I said, dude, how many times did you drive by Fame or Muscle Shoals Sound during this time and want to go back in? He said, oh, every time. Because every time he'd see those guys, they'd say, look, man, you want to come back, you got work. You'll get sessions, whatever you want to do. When you're ready to come back, no questions asked. And he said, I just trusted God. And along this time, he's having a songwriting session with a friend of his named Paul Balash. And Lenny and Paul had been working for several hours, and just nothing's really coming, nothing's clicking. And Paul looked at Lenny and said, dude, you got anything else? And Lenny said, I do. I've got this one song that I can't fix it. I've got like 90% of it, but the bridge is giving me some trouble. So Paul said, cool, play it for me. So Lenny plays it for him, and they start to work on it. And this is how Lenny told it to me. He said, D, Paul and I just started weeping as we were writing this song, as we were writing this last little bridge to the song. He said, the Spirit of God was so powerful over that little bitty room where they were just playing their guitars. They finished the song, Lenny cut it, and it got put on a compilation CD, and nothing happens. Lenny's back to hammering nails, just doing his thing. Fast forward in our story to after 9/11. Michael W. Smith has been asked to go play at the National Cathedral as part of a memorial service, but he can't figure out what to play. And then he remembers a song that he had heard on a compilation CD. He gets the CD out, listens to it, and says, that's it. That's the song I'm going to do. And he ends up doing it. That song is Above All that you heard right before I got up to teach. That song is in the top 10 most played Christian songs in history. It is amazing. It's really popular in Africa. Lenny is a rock star in Africa. I'm not kidding. Lenny walks down the street in Africa and they mob him. He plays before 50,000 people in Africa. All because he made a choice. When I put the episode up, the podcast episode up, I had no idea what was about to happen. Lenny broke my servers. I mean, it was crazy. It was like 2 days after I put it up, my stats just start going crazy. I'm like, must be a bot has hit it or something. And sorry about that, old man glasses. And then the comments just start flooding on my blog. I want to read you just two. to show you the power of one choice. It says, Mr. Lenny, you are such a blessing to my life. Your songs just ministers to me, and I can never get enough of them. If I could only make a wish, then I would wish you were my grandpa. Thanks for visiting Kenya. God bless you so much. One more. Lenny, you're God's own piece of art. You're an inspiration to many all over the world, especially me, and I'm grateful to God for using you in this awesome manner, and to you for yielding to God's leading. My prayer for you is that the Lord should bless you with divine health and strength to carry on his mandate for the rest of your life. Shalom, with love, from Nigeria. Lenny made a choice that did not look like what the world said was the right thing to do. Lenny made a choice that he didn't know how it was going to end up. And it did not end up good first, right? This was years later that Above All hit. All because he made a choice. That's what we all got to do, folks. We've all got choices to make. Maybe for you, the choice is you're not even a follower of Jesus, and you can't be a disciple until you are. If you have never done that, please see Pastor Stephen or Michael or Suzanne, anybody. They would love to have that conversation with you and talk to you about that. Maybe you are, and you've just never figured out a good way to let the world know. Well, in my humble estimation, the best way that we currently have in our world and our society to publicly declaim that you're a follower of Jesus is baptism. When I was a pastor, that was my favorite thing to do. I told them, if y'all would just let me baptize, do all the baptisms, I'm good. I don't have to preach another sermon. I don't have to teach anything. All I want to do is do baptisms, because there is just something special and beautiful about that declaration. And again, talk to Stephen, Michael, Suzanne, any of them. They'd love to walk you through that. Maybe you've already done those two. Your steps are going to get a little harder, a little more challenging. Maybe your choice is there's somebody that you need to forgive, and you know you need to forgive, but you just won't. That's what following our Rabbi Jesus is all about. It's forgiving people who don't deserve it. Or maybe you need to learn to be generous with your money. I don't know. Maybe those are your choices. But I'm going to offer you one last one. But I got to give you a real strong warning before I tell you the prayer I'm about to teach you. Do not do this flippantly. Do not do this on the spur of the moment. You do what I'm about to tell you, you do this after a lot of prayer. Because here's why. The prayer I'm about to teach you will be answered by God 100% of the time. Never seen it. I've never seen it not. And I'm living testament. The fact that I'm up here is a living testament that don't pray this prayer until you're serious, because God's going to do it. But it is, it will open a journey up for you. And the prayer is just real simple. It's 3 words. Whatever, whenever, wherever. Whatever, whenever, wherever. One friend of mine prayed this prayer, and he got moved from Bowling Green, Kentucky to Southern California. I prayed this prayer and got pulled out of the business world into the church world. But I wouldn't change anything. Lenny prayed this prayer, and he ended up impacting a generation and generations to come. So, what's your choice? Let me pray for you. Father God, I pray for my brothers and sisters here at Crosswinds Church. I pray for those that you are just undeniably speaking to, that there's a choice that they need to make. God, I pray that you would give them the courage and the strength to make that choice. And I pray that you would give them the peace that comes from knowing that they have followed you as completely as they know how. Father, again, I just can't wait to see how you're going to change the world, change these people's family, change this community, all because there might be some people here that would make that choice to become a fully devoted follower of yours. God, we love you and we praise you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Steve.